G'day guys, welcome back. Money in the Tank, episode 53 today, I believe it is. Bradley Tabone.
It is 53.
Yep. Good stuff. Welcome back, mate. Welcome back off your sick bed. We're another man down today with Arnie with a couple of sickies at home, but we've got a replacement guest in today, a special guest as well. So we're going to throw to him very, very shortly. Without further ado, my name is Joel Seach, Principal Advisor, Harpel FG.
Brad Tabone, journalist and startup guy.
And we've got Wayne Tayton. Wayne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Wayne Tayton from Your Property Advocates. We're buyers agents in the northeastern area of Melbourne. And for those who don't know what a buyer's agent is, it's basically a licensed real estate agent. We look after the buyer in a transaction as opposed to a real estate agent who looks after the vendor.
Awesome. Good to have you along, mate. So I'm sure we'll be definitely laying into that topic a little bit more in detail shortly. You can fill us in and the listeners in into what a property advocate does, because it's quite an interesting area, and maybe some of the tankers out there haven't heard of an advocate or what they do, and they've just heard of real estate agents. But as you alluded to, Wayne, real estate agents will act for the seller in the transaction and not necessarily the buyer, although they'll make you pretend that they're there for you. So anyway, we'll dig into that topic when we go. It's a bit of fun, but we're looking forward to it, Wayne. And you mentioned you're the northeastern suburbs of Melbourne, but I know you do operate purchasing and buying all over Australia with you and your team. So it'll be great. So yeah, without further ado, let's get stuck into Rivkin's rules, and we've got a great episode of show today for you guys. Obviously, with the property advocate with Wayne here, but also just a bit of an update on markets. Brad's got some cool news as well from offshore there in Bali, I believe. Brad, where in the world is coming, Brad Tabone?
We are in Munduk.
Munduk
in the mountains of Bali. So and then next week will be Singapore, but this week we're in the kind of like Ubud, but kind of less developed and quiet. So picture mountains and trees and good views of the ocean from very, very far away. And before, Jolly, we jump into Rivkin's socials.
Yeah,
and so we've been noticing we've actually been getting a few listeners that aren't subscribers. So if you are a listener and you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe bell on YouTube and hit that notification bell. And please send us a comment, because we'd love to have a chat with you about anything, really. Any topics, any questions you've got. We'd love to engage. Otherwise, you can get us on all the other socials, whether it's Instagram, I think Twitter, and Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and everything else. So, yeah, just thought I'd get that in, Jolly, since that's usually an Arnie thing to do.
Great work, Brad. Love your work, mate. Picking up the slack for Arnold there. That's fantastic.
Got to cover my brother.
And we've got a good Q&A today as well from a listener also, which is fantastic. And yes, we should make it illegal to listen and not subscribe. So yeah, get the subscriptions going, guys, and help out the pod. We love it. Helps out with all the data. Anyway, the Bible, here we are, Rivkin's rules in his convertible, flicking open to page Renee's Rivkinisms. Here we go. We're into it. Renee's favorite Rivkinisms is, I love cars because they are sculptures on wheels, and how can I have too many sculptures? There you go. Renee's favorite Rivkinisms. I love cars because they are sculptures on wheels, and how can I have too many sculptures?
I don't know. I think I love cars as well, but I think you can have too many. I mean, a few people that I follow lately have said they've got like 25 cars and they're now bored of them. So I think Renee may have just never hit the magic 25 number.
You can only drive one at a time from last time.
Correct. I've only got one car, so.
And it's
I've got a couple. Got a 4-wheel drive and a SUV. So
it's practical.
Out there.
Absolutely. And it's hard enough to keep one car clean at a time anyway, especially with 2 kids. So,
well, the 4-wheel drive you don't need to keep clean. So
no, definitely.
The whole idea of that is to keep it not clean and make it look like you're not a yuppie. So
that's it.
Now let's throw to Brad now. So Brad, do you want to touch on any interesting news in the market of late, and then I'll chime in where I feel relevant, and Wayne as well.
Yeah. So the Fed, we like talking interest rates here because obviously it's the topic of the time, but the Fed signals are slowing to interest rate rises very soon. Now, whether that means very soon, i.e. in the next month, or very soon, early 2023, the Bank of Korea or South Korea actually opted for a smaller hike this month off the back of that. And so it looks like there is, with last month's inflation numbers coming down, I think the Fed signaling, I think everyone's very, very keen themselves to to start slowing. If there's kind of like a signal from obviously, like you say, Joe, when the US gets sick, everyone sneezes. People kind of listen to the biggest bank that's probably causing a lot of the inflation with the US dollar at the moment. So watch
Other way
this space.
around. US sneezes, everyone
That's
else
what I mean.
gets
US
a cold.
sneezes in. You know what I mean, Joe.
I know.
It's
I think
your
everyone knew what I mean.
euphemism.
Yeah,
I think
I've
everyone
said it
knows
a
what I
few
mean.
times.
So that's interesting news. Tesla shares have actually
with the inflation stuff, Brad, there has been a bit of toing and froing in terms of someone comes out and says that, oh yeah, we're going to slow, and then the other one comes out and says don't expect it to slow too much, and it's sort of quite an interesting table tennis match at the moment, and a bit of ping pong back and forth. So it will be fascinating to see where it goes. But the market has looked like it's been indicating positive momentum in terms of the hawkish stance starting to regress a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, look. Also, is the slowing of it good? We've talked about this a number of times, which is whether it's the bullwhip effect or whatever you want to call it, where you mishmash. So yes, inflation's slowing on one data point faster than kind of probably predicted. But do you take that one data point, heave on the brakes, and then you end up just getting another month, 2-3 months down the track that ends up climbing and stuffing the whole thing up? And so there is, I guess, a lot of premise, and people have kind of commented on this since the start, which is, do you just kind of stay kind of trying to get it down, and then once it's actually down, or once it's showing a bit more than just one data point, otherwise you're going to have that kind of bullwhip effect of playing both sides of playing with the economy, and no one will be able to plan properly. So it's going to be an interesting one. I don't know if Wayne, you've got any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Wayne about interest rates, Wayne, and your environment, because you deal with it a lot.
Yeah, and it impacts the property market, quite severely, and borrowing capacity. And the market has taken a bit of a spell this year due to all the interest rate hikes. Borrowing capacity has dropped down a little bit. They do tend to overshoot, though, don't they? History tells us that they usually go one or two too many, the straw that broke the camel's back, and can send us into a little bit of a recession. Although they seem to be on top of this cycle. I think we're closer to the top of this cycle than not. What do you guys think? As you said,
I think the inflation, the inflation worry, and Brad alluded to early next year. I believe from history they've said when the issue has happened with inflation is where they've pulled off the brakes too quickly and too soon, and it's sort of that bullwhip effect in terms of the inflation comes back in again and starts to get more ingrained, which we have referred to in the podcast before. That's what you don't want to see. You don't want to see ingrained inflation, and you're better to be, I think the central banks know this. You're better to be more conservative now and take that little bit of extra caution than try to pull that brake off too quickly, because it's hard to slow that car, that big truck going down a hill, that big economy going down a hill, if the brakes come off, and starts to get that inertia and that momentum going.
Well, you guys are probably too young, but in the 70s, they were a little slow when the inflation genie jumped out of the bottle. And then we had high inflation right through the 80s. And then Volcker came in and hit it hard, and interest rates had to go up to 18% to slow things down.
The good old days,
which is just crazy to think. It's crazy to think about. But you've also got like that Volcker. I mean, he's kind of resonating today, which are people saying, and I think that's why they've raised it. Let's just say the US has raised 0.75 4 times in a row, whatever it is. It's because they're going, well, we knew what happened last time, and we don't want to repeat a volcanism coming in and having to raise it to 18%. So let's get it up and try and get it up quickly. And that's what I'm hoping that they do in a way. Maybe it's nearing the top, but I think one data point's not enough. I think we've got to probably see 3-4 data points. But I think, Jolly, you commented on last week, logistics, like shipping costs, reducing from whatever it was, 27,000 down to 3,000.
16 Shanghai to California, 16,000. It's peaked to 3,000 for a container.
And so, there was an article out that I was reading, which was referring to that shipbuilding is the fastest in 30 years at the moment. And so, ship orders over the next 4 years is going to add something like 20% to the global shipping fleet, which is crazy. And I think it's good for those massive shipbuilders in South Korea and China and stuff like that. But it sounds to me like, because inflation is probably 2 reasons this time. One is obviously the printing of dollars and the money supply side of thing and people spending. And then the other side of it was the logistics and kind of supply shocks. And so I think what we might be seeing is the kind of initial effect of on our wallets with higher interest rates at the moment. And we're going to see the creeping in of kind of, like you said, Joel, when shipping goes from 16 down to 3, that's a large impact on goods, and that can carry through. And whether that ends up creating kind of like a stagflation, deflationary, we'll see. But inflation, that's where that one is. FTX continues to, I guess, rattle the crypto markets. So he's not in jail yet, Sam Bankman-Fried, which is very, very interesting. And
we can almost start a where in the world is Sam
Bankman-Fried. But the contagion is continuing to kind of play havoc with whether you look at Gemini, whether you look at Genesis. You're looking at, even yesterday, I think CZ had to pull a tweet, which he put in there about CoinDesk. And so there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. Now there's a problem with, I guess, the hash rate of Bitcoin. So I guess the power behind Bitcoin miners, so people trying to sell coins versus mining coins versus what's going on at the moment, which has caused a bit of a crash. Now I see Bitcoin's back up above 16,000 US, but it did drop down into the 15s or maybe even to the 14s over the last few days because of this kind of bit of a problem between, I guess, lenders going bust and miners trying to take coins, and whether they're selling them or whether they're mining them. It's created this bit of a contagion effect throughout all phases of crypto. And so that's interesting. Polkadot, which is one of the big crypto ones, one of the guys that started Ethereum. So there's 3 guys that started Ethereum. He's recently resigned as CEO and gone back into the dev side to worry about that. So there's some questions around, is that kind of like an incoming thing on Polkadot as well? But I guess watch this space on, I guess, the big ones, because Genesis is actually tied to like the crypto banks, and you're starting to talk about like $30 to $60 billion worth of kind of fiat-backed market plays and the rest of it then. So it's started grow out a little bit bigger. And because they held such poor, so the guy that's taken over the voluntary, administration or whatever it is, the CEO, he just keeps coming out every week just saying, okay, it was 8 billion, then it was 16, it was 32, kind of, doubling. Then it was 60 billion. And he said there's just, since day one, there was never any sort of financial, regulation or processes within the company. And because they haven't kept any records, they're basically just creating from the start what it was, and then trying to backdate all the transactions and try and work out where the holes are, because there is actually no internal financial records and books and statements about where anything was. And because Alameda had a free ride of just accessing client funds out of FTX, they're basically making up the hole as it is at the moment. So watch that space. Twitter. So we've got to comment on Elon every week, even if Arnie is not here, Joel. Twitter, Elon's come out saying that he's not going to be firing any more people after the latest kind of round of craziness over the weekend, where they locked the offices. They sent an email around to everyone with a yes or no button asking if you want to be here anymore, and and then found out things like the payroll team is gone, the team that actually gets rid of people are gone, and the people that kind of kept the lights on were gone, and so there's a lot of flipping and flopping about that. But
did he give everyone their t-shirts back that he found?
The Stay Woke ones?
Well, Brad shared with the podcast group that he was in the office and he found, I don't know if it was hundreds or thousands of these hashtag Stay Woke t-shirts in the Twitter offices.
And I guess, that whole anti-woke thing, finding a whole cupboard full of Stay Woke.
It
wouldn't surprise me if someone put them there, let's be honest.
True.
But at
he
the same
really
time,
he really does act on his thoughts of the moments, though, doesn't he? And then has to backflip often.
That is Elon to a T. I think this $46 billion purchase of Twitter has been a act on the moment kind of thing, which has ended up going, oh no, why have I got this really expensive thing now.
And we love him here, Elon. So keep going, mate. Great content.
Yeah.
Keep going.
But it does create great content. So after getting rid of many thousands of people internally, he's now actually going back out there and hiring a whole bunch of engineers and stuff. But good on that. But because he stated that he needs to bring in a CEO now, and he can't, it's not his, it's not his thing. He's hiring. You've got like Morgan Stanley that now re-rating Tesla up because he's going to be going in there. And some news that Tesla is looking to build another gigafactory in Asia somewhere. So that's the big news. So Twitter was up 8%. Sorry, Tesla. Sorry, too many companies.
Because Tesla had a bit of a rocky one there, where they sort of felt that he was taking his eye off the prize a bit and focusing too much on Twitter.
Yeah, it came off a little bit too, didn't it? The price and
come off big time. But basically saying because he's now going to go focus back on his bigger businesses like Tesla, and they're announcing within the next month a new gigafactory location in Asia. Do we want to take guesses? Let's take guesses right now. Wayne, where do you think it's going to be? Well, one in China, one in Berlin, one in Texas.
And where the next one's going to be?
Yeah, it's in Asia somewhere. Which Asian country?
So the gigafactories are just gigantic factories with a lot of solar panels on the roof, and where they put production of a certain thing, Brad.
Usually it's they usually tool it up for specific models of cars, but also to produce their Tesla batteries as well. Yeah. So it's usually tooled up for a specific couple of product lines. But
they like a warmer climate.
I don't. Obviously, like a cheaper labor source, maybe. I don't know. It uses a lot of robots, but it still uses a lot of humans. So I'm going to go Vietnam. That's my guess.
I've got no idea, but I'll say Indonesia.
Oh, good
Where'd
one.
you say, Brad?
I said Vietnam, but Indonesia. Boom. Maybe.
Malaysia?
Yeah.
They got one in Malaysia? I'll throw Malaysia.
You could throw it on Borneo and be just, Indonesia and Malaysia at the same time. But yeah, since Indonesia is actually moving their capital city from Jakarta to Borneo, there you go. Very interesting. But watch your space, because anywhere that basically gets a gigafactory ends up turning out crazy because of the amount of production that goes through one of them. I think he said a while ago that the world only needs 12 or 16 gigafactories to produce all the EV cars and all the solar batteries that it needs. So
yeah, it's amazing. Do you reckon that, I think we've spoken about it before, is that his long-term play? Do you think he wants to try to be the caterer of the EV revolution of batteries and less, I don't know, get all these cars, with Tesla batteries?
Yeah, he says that he wants to be the vertically integrated company, which obviously they own the mines, they mine, they get the produce, they turn the raw produce into materials, and then they create the undercarriages. So what I think he eventually wants to be is just like the undercarriage of every car, and then whoever, your Toyotas and all the rest of them, can utilize the kind of like the platform to build whatever they want to on top, and so the car will be more or less the same undercarriage, and thinks that if you can kind of create the end-to-end process of that and be the best at it, you're then the platform for all kind of automated vehicles moving.
So Greg, what you're saying, the likes of Volkswagen and Toyota and those sorts of companies, they would have to get all the undercarriage from Tesla.
Yeah, he's saying that they're going to be, he's playing for, they'll be so advanced on the battery part, they'll be so advanced on the vertical integration of the mines, the producing of the products, even the recycling of the batteries, that their platform will be so, I guess, competitive that if you weren't using their platform, then you'll be kind of left behind. I guess, similar in a way to how Samsung makes kind of like Snapdragons, but they also make, the iPhone chips, the A5s and the rest of the, the new M1s. It's kind of saying, hey, look, we're really, really good at making something. Hey,
stupid not to use us.
Not to use us. Even if though we have a competitor phone, because like say Samsung has a competitor phone, but people still buy Samsung Snapdragon CPUs because they're the best kind of parts inside the phones. So I think he's kind of trying to be that. And then your traditional brands are more like the flavors of what goes on top of that, the luxuriousness of it, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it sort of seems like a bit of a I don't know if it's the correct term as a race, but a lot of these big manufacturers are starting to get onto the EV, train now, and you can
Everyone.
see Toyota's got a lot of money. There's a lot of car companies with money out there, and they'd be thinking, well, can we beat Tesla to the punch and get there, or a Tesla, already so far ahead and so almost there, then it's going to be hard for the others to catch up, and they're going to be destined to use Tesla's vertical integration model. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Last couple of things. New protests out in the largest iPhone factory, which is in China, with 2 million workers over COVID issues again. So I think there's some riots there 2 weeks ago where people were jumping fences and trying to get out. Supposedly the company Foxconn has reneged on paying and subsidizing the cost of food when they're locked in. And so some more problems to that, and which is looking like an impact of up to 10-20% of the next model of iPhones coming out being impacted at the moment. Yeah, in China. And that's, I guess, why Apple are looking to move production over to India at the moment, more and more, since this whole kind of COVID zero. Even though they are looking to lax it in some areas, they are still kind of trying to hit it, and it's just causing chaos at these large factories. I mean, 2 million people factories. We're not talking about small. We're talking about kind of like 1/12 of the population of Australia inside a factory.
It seems like China's been in the news, the market news daily for the past few months with their, are we going to ease? We have eased. We're going to restrict back again, and toing and froing. And obviously markets hate that. And then big companies with massive factories where they don't have certainty and there's political risk, it just starts to become, a big challenge, and let alone for the people living there. And we'll see where the toing and froing ends. And I know, Brad shared a really interesting China podcast about saving face in terms of not wanting to change their rules, and almost admitting like they were partially wrong or they've been too strict. And that's a real worry factor when you have a political government that can't check their egos and say we need to adjust our stance now.
And you've got to think about long-term implications too, don't you? Because to me, is the West going to look more towards India over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, when a government is driven by ideology at the end of the day, and the CCP is, right, which at the end of the day, they are a single party. They've got a social contract, which is, we will give you a better life if you allow us to control you more. And that's a social contract that has been agreed to in China. And that government, and, it's a very Chinese Asian thing, but, that's saving face. I mean, my wife is Chinese Malaysian, and her father comes from China, and there's no kind of, race and it's just a literally built-in cultural thing, that because by doing so, it's kind of like a hit on you, and so the government can't be wrong in China. So when they came up with COVID zero at the start, they were saying that we, the Communist Party, have the ability to control COVID. And the first year and a half, they did. They kicked everybody's butt because of their controls and their control mechanisms, their QR code scanning, their shutting downs of cities and the rest of it. But they proved that they could control COVID. And so when they say that and they back it up, and then their vaccination rates were very, very low for older people, because generally people believed in the CCP that they could control COVID. Now, when then COVID starts ramping with Omicron and other variants, you've got the problem of low vaccination rates because people believed in you, and now you can't just turn around and say we were wrong, because then that goes against everything in the ethos of CCP. But like you said, Wayne, that has, in the real world, that has ramifications, and the amount of kind of production that is getting moved to like Vietnam, Indonesia, India, especially around the iPhone around India, is just huge. And even back to the US mainland, with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of kind of semiconductors and all the rest of it. So,
because big companies, big corporates want continuity and consistency, and if they feel like they can get that better in India, then they're probably not afraid to move it. So yeah, interesting.
And that's a wrap up.
Yeah.
For me, anyway, Joel, you might have some.
Last tidbit before we get to Wayne, because I'm cognizant of time today. We want to get to Wayne, got plenty to share today. So just an interesting one that came across my desk for the sports fans out there, given we're in the World Cup environment at the moment. So a soccer one is the shares of the football club Manchester United surged 25% their second straight day of double-digit gains and touched a new 52-week high after the owners said they were exploring strategic alternatives, including a potential sale, which I know will delight the Man U fans because I think they hate the ownership group, which is the Glaziers, I believe, of Man U. So they've been...
We just say Cristiano Ronaldo, right?
They just got rid of him.
Got rid of him because he got on TV and said what he thinks of the ownership group, and they just sacked him. And so double-digit... So on the stock exchange, 25%.
25% surged 25%. So it shows how much people are happy that the owners are thinking about getting out. So
imagine that if you're the owners thinking, like you said, the stock market returned for 25%.
Not an endorsement.
It's like a Hamatech jolly. If I said, "Oh, look, guys, I'm leaving last year," and everyone's just like, Hamatech price surge," I'll be like, "Oh, that really, really hurt."
And then you check your share price, and you'd be happy again.
And then I'd be happy again, right?
I'm hated, but my share price is up.
But I made more money. Not even me. It's actually true. It's true. Coming back to a quick point, Wayne, when you brought up India, I just quick fact checked myself. 25% of all Apple products will be created in India by 2025, and they want to be at 5 to 7% by the end of this year.
Wow.
And that's up from only 1% in 2020.
That's a big shift.
It is.
That's a big shift.
Yeah, big shift. 1% or 5% or 25% may not sound like a heap, but when you're talking Apple, that's a big company, and that's
and that's one company. Imagine if they all start shifting.
Yeah.
And I suspect if Apple's doing it, there's a few other ones that are probably doing it at the moment. Indeed.
Yeah. But without further ado, let's thanks for the market update, Brad, and chiming in there as well, Wayne. It was great to give the listeners a bit of a snippet on what the goings on are of late with all things stocks, companies, inflation, and politics and cultural stuff. Everything thrown in the mix there today. So crypto as well.
Even crypto got a verse.
Yeah, absolutely. So, without further ado, let's introduce Wayne Tayton. So, obviously, Wayne, thanks for coming on and introducing yourself at the start. But, mate, where do you see the market currently? And let's sort of, I guess, dig in terms of the property advocacy side of things as well. So, maybe starting with where the property advocacy business is in terms of what you do to help consumers. So, give the tankers a bit of a 101 on property advocacy.
Yeah, sure. So I touched on it earlier, but essentially we're real estate agents, professionals, looking after the buyer, not the seller. It's pretty simple. We get paid by the buyer. The real estate agent gets paid by the seller. Their job is to get the seller or vendor the highest amount they possibly can. So that's pretty counterintuitive if you're going to a real estate agent to look at buying a property. And in Australia, it's a relatively new concept. Fairly big in Sydney, Melbourne growing and growing fast. In the States, there's a buyer's advocate for every vendor advocate. So, it's huge there.
Both sides of the equation. And is it also in America, is it big for rentals too? Do they have advocates for rentals as well?
They do. We're not there yet. But yeah, it could be something down the track. Some buyers advocates do help people find a rental and negotiate on their behalf. That can be part of a buyer's advocate's brief. I'm not in that space yet, but yeah, I think a couple are.
You can confirm in the US that they are, because of all the build to rents and all the rest of it, and the rental market over there is slightly different to over here. It's and a lot of rentals over there is corporation. A lot of our rental here is privately owned. Like build to rent. So over there, I'd say 80-90% is corporation owned. Whereas, and they flip out the thought of like, what do you mean? Like mum and dads own the properties? And it's like, yes. And they're like, so what happens in a building like this? And I'm like, every apartment is just owned by mum and dad instead of the whole building being owned by one. It still can work.
Yeah, very different worlds.
Yeah, and we're having a bit of a drama at the moment with that, Wayne, which you might be able to touch on in terms of the rental market and the supply factor and disincentivizing from government.
Yeah. So, various governments, look at the Queensland state government recently. I do a bit of buying in Queensland as well. And, what they were doing with land tax, and you had to, most land tax is a state-based tax, and there's a threshold for each state. But Queensland were adding in other states as part of their threshold. So you were essentially being double taxed. So finally they've seen wisdom and cancelled that. So
and good luck trying to get that money from people in other states. That's the other
Well, other
thing.
states were saying they weren't going to cop up their information, and it was just an absolute hornet's nest in the
a
end. It
nightmare.
was dog's breakfast. Yeah,
kind of like an Elon fly by your fly by the night sleep thing and just making random calls.
Policy on the run seemed like a good idea at the time. Oops, backlash.
Yeah. And that speaks to government intervention and people losing faith in governments, even when they say something and it doesn't happen. The people are like, "Oh, you said that once. Is that to say that you won't bring it back again?" And
yeah,
it's concerning. But the mum and dad investor type thing was what I was probably alluding to as well, Wayne. There was like a number of years ago now, like the government's come out and made these things almost like a stigma attached with being a property investor. But these people are supplying people with accommodation, and we're starting to see a real negative ramification of that now with the rental market.
Yeah, spot on, Joel. And it was wrong to sort of demonise landlords. Landlords supply 75% of, I think that's the number, of rental properties. The government doesn't supply much at all. And that's flipped around over the last few years. But the last couple of years, investors have sort of stayed away from the market a touch. And look at the crisis we have now. Rental prices are going through the roof in Queensland. And I'm talking, in and around, say, the Gold Coast to Brisbane, in and around, say, the Logan area, the Ipswich areas, where property is around $500,000 to $600,000. Rents have gone up from roughly $500 a week to $600 a week and climbing. And this is in the space of 12 months. There's such a shortage of rental properties available.
Not sustainable.
And that's not just Queensland, that's everywhere.
Yeah, not sustainable. Yeah. So I guess back to the property advocacy side of things, Wayne, where do you feel that is kind of the best bang for your buck in terms of money spent when engaging in an advocate?
Yeah. So
in terms of a first home buyer, an investor, where do you see, like, hey, if you're going to do it once in your life, best time to do it?
Investor and first home buyers definitely should, if they're not a seasoned investor. So let's start with first home buyer. First home buyers, they have not a lot of knowledge when buying property. What I like about dealing with first home buyers is they know they don't know, and they understand the value of a buyer's advocate. Unfortunately, there is that perception that buyer's advocates are very, very expensive. Like, people are thinking, oh, well, they're going to be $25,000. And it's not the case. The prices are coming down, and there are first homeowner specialists in the buyer advocacy space, and they do slightly better deals for them. So you get it wrong when you're buying a property, it can cost you lots of money for a long time. So spending, let's call it $10,000 on a buyer's advocate, money well spent. Just in negotiation alone, they'll save you more than that.
Yeah, it could be the best money you ever spend, I reckon, for a first home buyer, when you're so wet between the ears. What's that old saying? You just don't know what you don't know. And I remember back even when Aaron and I bought our first house in 2008, I think it was, and the ignorance I had going into the whole thing, I'm just lucky we got a good agent that was like really nice, and we ended up being friends with her, and she was just very ethical, which is just not not that common in that space. So we could have got absolutely taken to the cleaners in terms of the amount we had to pay up, but she ended up just giving it to us the price that was listed. And said there was no one else interested, and we were happy to make it work, and helped us through the whole stamp duty thing and those sorts of things, which agents just don't do. They don't care. So yeah, I sort of agree with you, Wayne, in terms of, it could be the best money you ever spend in terms of negotiating purchase price alone, in terms of maybe saving them from going above and beyond where they have to go.
We teach them the process. We say, talk to your accountant, financial advisor. Talk to your mortgage broker. Make sure you get that pre-approval, so we get our ducks in a row before they even go hunting. There's and build and pest inspections. So you've got to tick all the boxes along the way, so they're protected. Because unfortunately, in the Australian property market, it's buyer beware.
Especially with the amount of remediation work that's going to be coming through. I mean, Wayne, I kind of part own a software business in construction to kind of works with about 80% of commercial builders in Australia. And, we've seen kind of over the last 10 years, the the amount of Phoenix kind of Middle Eastern companies coming over, and European companies build a couple of flats or townhouses, and whether it's kind of lay Rio, get inspection, remove Rio, put in a next floor plan, pour concrete, or waterproofing, all the rest of it. So the amount of remedial work, getting someone in that actually knows how to do the checks is, at the moment, in my mind, if you are a person that is not mature in buying property, especially kind of like your condominiums and your townhouses and that sort of stuff. And in my opinion, just craziness. But I mean, the bit that makes me just laugh when you said first home buyers, the question today is from my cousin, who is a first home buyer, and who only told me a couple of days ago that she just bought a renovated place in Chadstone, and I asked her, what have you got any questions at the moment? And we'll go into the question in a second, but she's like, I'm so lost that my question is, what question should I be asking? That's like she asked me a question, and I said, "Oh, that's really great. That's a broad question." And I said, "Oh, have you got anything else?" And she's like anything, I should be prepared, or do I need to organize? I'm so lost that my question is, what question should I actually be asking? So I thought that was
gold. That's gold, because that's exactly where most of them are. And that's why I like dealing with first home buyers, because they're actually aware of that. Whereas some of my upsizers and downsizer clients, which might be their second or third purchase, they've done it once or twice, but everyone's an Eddie the expert with property.
Oh yeah, especially over the last 10 years or 15 years making money, or 20 years. Excuse me, I've bought 4 properties and I've made 70% per property. I know what I'm doing. It's a little bit of that is market related.
Yeah, exactly. But the checks and balances, they're not always on top of either.
No.
Getting a conveyancer to look at a contract before you put an offer in, and just simple little things. Not everyone gets it.
Yeah.
What do they say? A little bit of knowledge, I'm just writing down here, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. They talk about that. So yeah, the seasoned or person, I've done it a couple of times, or I've bought an investment property once, it can be quite dangerous in terms of not knowing what you don't know.
Yeah. I do particularly enjoy working with younger investors as well, and teaching them how to build a portfolio and not just one investment property. And there's that old adage, cash flow versus capital growth. And you guys sort of know a bit about that. And, what's more important? That's always the $1 million question, isn't it? Cash flow or capital growth.
Well, yeah, both. I've always found both are important. There's another good saying is cash flow keeps you in and capital growth gets you out. So it's no use having something that's going to give you some positive cash flow for 30 years if you get no capital growth from it, because it's just cash flow and it just adds to your income, whereas capital growth actually adds to your wealth.
Spot on. And some sprinklers will push one and one will push the other, but both are important. But then you can have one depending on what time or what stage you are in your life too.
Yeah, time horizon,
Cash flow in your 50s, 60s is probably more important than capital growth.
Yep. Yeah. So, but speaking to a good property advocate, he'd probably be able to find you both. I'd imagine he'd be able to find you the best of both worlds, that balance.
Especially if you're in your 30s, you're a little bit younger, you want both. And if you want to multiply, you need cash flow as well as capital growth.
Yeah, so just explain that to the listeners, Wayne. I'm sure that'll be of interest to the listeners in terms of multiplying and leveraging upon leverage and buying, 1 to 2 to 3, and how that impacts or how that works from a serviceability, and then how you go with that. Because I know you've bought and sold many over the years yourself.
Yeah. So just simply put, so you buy a property, you've got to buy something that's got fairly good capital growth, because you need that capital growth to draw equity, the equity being the value versus against your loan. You want the capital growth there, so that equity builds. You draw that equity out to buy your next property. But if you can get and then you multiply, you just do that again and again and again. So that's pretty simply put. But cash flow is important, because in order to multiply, if you need to be able to have minimal cash impost or cash flow negative, and you can buy cash flow positive properties. You can negative gear with your tax refund from depreciation and all the costs and so forth. If it's costing you next to nothing, then you can have as many properties as you like, because they're costing you nothing to hold.
Because that cash flow serviceability impost starts to be outweighed then, because you do hear kind of the thing of getting tapped out with debt, tapped out with serviceability, is because potentially the property they've bought hasn't had the cash flow to sustain what they're trying to do, which then inhibits them from moving ahead in their portfolio.
Spot on.
Have we seen any service? I mean, Joel or Wayne, are we starting to see any serviceability issues where you've got those Australians that have? I mean, my mate's in Singapore because call it the Australian investment strategy, which is you get a house, you take the equity, you get another house, another property, etc. Are we seeing anybody at the moment with kind of the interest rates going up the way they have across multiple loans? I know they look at serviceability, Joel, across all your properties when you take out a new loan, but are we starting to see some people get pretty tight there yet, or is it not where they're owning multiple homes, or not really?
I've certainly seen it with a couple of my clients where serviceability has affected them. They've got one or two other properties, interest rates going up, serviceability has dropped down, but rents are going up as well. So serviceability, it tends to sort of counteract it a little bit. But I've certainly had clients where their loan amounts approved have dropped, and that's affected them.
And don't forget, whenever you're taking a loan out in Australia, it's a pretty stringent system here in terms of the requirements you need to meet serviceability, incorporating your budget living expenses and the loan repayments. They actually add a 300 basis point buffer to whatever your interest rate's going to be. So they actually increased that APRA increased that during the time when the market rates were coming down, because they saw, well, the market rates are quite low. We're going to add an extra buffer on there. So they add 300 basis points of buffer in there in terms of making sure it's stress tested. And they haven't changed that yet either. They haven't reduced that back to what it was pre-COVID in terms of, it used to be, Wayne, it used to be 250 basis points.
Yeah, I think they just reduce it by 50 basis points.
Maybe they did.
300, and they've just recently dropped it down to 250 because we're probably at the upper end of this cycle anyway.
Yeah. Now, my question was more like, I know that the interest rates have climbed. Now, they haven't climbed by 300 basis points generally from people that maybe have bought a year ago, but it's starting to come into that kind of range. It's not far away. And so I just didn't know if you had started seeing at the client level, because I mean, statistics and foreclosure rates and all the rest of it, they all take a bit of time to get through the news, and you're at the forefront. And so I was just kind of interested to see if you'd had kind of started hearing much in that space, but or if it's just a little bit kind of sporadic and not that big a deal at the moment.
Spot on. And keep in mind that there's still term, people have locked in 3 and 4 year loans, and they've probably got another year. So you won't really see that for at least another 12 months, I reckon.
That's a good point. We've got a lot of fixed over here in Australia, right? So
still living the good fixed term life. They're living a double life almost. People
Brendan McBride.
People live in the variable life, and then people live in the fixed life. Yeah. Absolutely.
So the big question now is, when do you start thinking about fixing again? It's certainly not right now, I wouldn't have thought.
The hard one, right? Because no one's got a little glow, but you'd probably, I mean, I was all for, as Joel in that know, last year I was hampering on about people fixing, but at the moment your risk reward is a little bit less.
Trying to beat the actuaries at their game. It's a very hard one to do. Very hard one to do.
Much smarter than us.
You may have missed the boat. So I guess the broad question, Wayne, and I hate the broad question with property markets, because where do you see them going? It depends on where, which region, which state, which area or postcode. I guess, in general, how are you finding? How have you found this year in terms of markets more broadly? I know COVID, everything went, like a rocket. How are you finding at the moment? Is it a bit of a two-speed economy, or?
Yeah, it's a good point you make too, Joel, that there are markets within markets. I get frustrated when people talk about the Australian property market or the Victorian property market, because there's markets within markets. Even within suburbs, there's markets within markets. So some of the areas that I'm liking is still that Queensland region, Gold Coast through to Brisbane. That's still reasonably low priced. It had some crazy growth during COVID. Well, like we're talking 25, 30% in 1 year. But even last year with the market cooling, or this year with the market cooling, it still had 6 or 7% growth. So now, and the reason being, it's not just a fly-by-night, this is the hotspot. There's a lot of infrastructure. There's hospitals being built. There's roads. There's bridges. There's the Olympics. It's about infrastructure, I believe, are a big part of it. I think in Melbourne, the sub $1.5 million market is still very strong. I like the areas around Ringwood, Heathmont, Croydon, Eltham, still very strong markets. And again, haven't taken much of a haircut at all this year. And even when you read the news and you see that, or see the news, the headlines are property market crashes everywhere. The market in Melbourne has dropped about 5% over the last 9 months, maybe 6% in general.
They love to generalize. I wrote a dot pointer, like when you hear the listeners out there, when you hear property markets plummeting, firstly, make sure you understand what the word plummeted is. Wayne just said maybe a 5% come off there, off a pretty, decent run. So that's one thing. Again, short term, nothing. It doesn't matter. Like, who cares? Unless you need to sell, it doesn't matter. And then always back in your mind, whenever the media jump up and say property market's coming off or property markets are hot, they're probably just referring to Melbourne and Sydney. That's all they know. It's like Melbourne and Sydney. That's all that's the ignorance of the media in Australia.
100%. And when they say, property forecasted to come off 25% and already 15%, it's in one postcode within one state within, probably a street within that postcode. And
it's probably an apartment or something like that. Yeah.
Correct. And they've just handpicked a specific place and they throw it on the front page. So they love news. They love to dramatize news, right?
In terms of where you see the market going now.
Yeah, so I still think there's a little bit more of the same with those markets I just mentioned for the next 12 months to 5 years even. So I still like that Brisbane, Gold Coast area, Ipswich, Moreton Bay area, north of Brisbane. Adelaide is going gangbusters. It's going to play a little bit of catch up, I think, over the next couple of years. And I do think the markets generally in Melbourne, once interest rates top out and plateau, they'll be back to the races again. I don't think we're going to have a 10%, 15% correction like some of the economists are talking about.
Yeah, the expert economists when it comes to property that are always wrong.
Yeah.
One question I had for my own information, I thought it'd be, and Brad might have a good question as well coming up after this one. I feel like I'm hogging the questions today because I love the topic. In terms of the regional shift that we've seen, do you see that tracking back at some stage down the track? Do you see that sort of, that was more of a COVID sporadic thing, or do you feel, where do you see the regional shift? And
really good point, because it has slowed up a little bit. It was definitely a phenomenon during COVID. And the prices in your Bendigos, Ballarats, Geelong, even some of your smaller towns.
Inverloch?
Yeah, absolutely.
So my grandma grew up there when I was younger, and I was down at Phillip Island in January, and I took my wife down in Inverloch, of all places. I said this was kind of where I spent my summers. And I was driving through, and I was like looking at some properties. I was like, I wonder how much they are. I was like, 2.1, 2.3, 2.2, and I was like, what? Who is traveling 2.5 hours out of Melbourne to go down to a little inlet and pay $2 million?
And that's a fair point you make too, Brad, because some of those little places will pull back a little bit because they went too hard. They went up too high too quickly. And without that infrastructure spending, it's not sustainable. And the population growth isn't sustainable.
Because people get frustrated if the infrastructure is not there. Is that sort of, they don't have the medicals, they don't have the transport, they get, waiting lists, there's issues with rental, there's issues with schooling, or, is that all the things that you need to come with it?
All of that, Joel, but jobs.
Yeah.
It's all about that. That's why I still think Bendigo, Ballarat, a 5 to 10 year really good prospects. As far as regional goes, I think they are great. Geelong is still flying, and Geelong's already a big city now, but it's going to be a bigger city. So I still like Geelong.
Because they've been adding the infrastructure with the demand and the property growth and the growth of the
and watch out for Bendigo Ballarat too. I still think
there's been a lot of investment into Bendigo Ballarat in terms of government services, moving government services like the headquarters out to Ballarat and that. Like it's big.
Yeah. So where do you
jobs?
see?
Like you mentioned jobs, right? I think creating a lot of jobs out there is only going to further spark it.
So you see the shift, Wayne, the shift regional was a bit of a spur of a moment thing, and you've seen it sort of start to slow a bit now. People have kind of had a knee-jerk reaction. And
I do. I think some of your holiday spots will just slow up a little bit, and I'm hoping so because I want to get a holiday house.
Me too. Just too expensive at the moment.
So, am I thinking with my heart or my brain there? I'm not sure.
Put the agenda out there, and it'll happen.
Tell everyone it's going to crash.
It's slowing. Yeah.
The reach of the pod will bring it down. Don't worry.
Yeah.
but your bigger regional towns that they're spending money on,
that still keep going. Yeah.
That'll be sustained.
I do have a question. This is from my cousin. I guess my only question at this point is, as a first home buyer who hasn't moved in yet, now she's already bought. Right, so that card is gone. Like, what are the most important things I should be doing to prepare for owning and living in my own home? What would you expect? Any recommendations?
And just say her property was an apartment or a townhouse, Brad?
Renovated townhouse in Chester.
Townhouse. Cool.
And she's already moved in.
No, she literally just bought it 4 days ago. And so
I hope she did all her correct due diligence before she bought it, but that's another thing. So I just think
is there any after the fact? I mean, is it still worth? I know that she's going to maybe get caught out now because she's already hasn't done the due diligence. I'm not saying she hasn't. Right? Yeah. I'm just saying if she has, she's going to get caught out. But is it still worthwhile doing some of that if they haven't done the due diligence to kind of know what's there? Because sometimes knowing now is better than knowing later.
Yeah, that's a good point because she owns it now, though. So
maybe she put it subject to, if there's still a subject to in there, subject to finance, subject to build and pest.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, meaning by due diligence. If she'd done all that, then she's got an out anyway. If she has a build and pest and they find issues with the property, structural or termites or something along those lines, that's an out. But if she hasn't done that, so your question is, okay, let's say she didn't do that. But it's too late. It's unconditional and she's moving in. If she's not sure about the quality of the build or something like that, you'd still get it done. And at least you know and you get things fixed.
What are the major DDs or due diligence that you recommend? Building pests?
Yeah. So get your financials right, first and foremost. So talk to your financial advisor, talk to your accountant. That's the first thing you do. Set a budget. Right, make sure you can afford the repayments. So, absolute no-brainer. First thing to do.
That one I know she would have done because of her parents and the rest of it. That was good.
All sorted. Conveyancer, and not a lot do this, but you have mortgage broker. Get your pre-approval once you've done your budget. Don't even look until you've got a written pre-approval. Then you know what your budget is.
Yeah.
Then you talk to a conveyancer or a property advocate, buyer's advocate, to help you buy and so forth. Conveyancer to look at the contract before you put an offer in. Not many do that. Because what if there are special conditions that are onerous to you? What if it doesn't include, this shed or this something in the property? You make sure you do all that.
Now, I don't know the property obviously in Chadstone your cousin's moved into, but if it was majorly renovated of recent, Wayne, in terms of a new build or a renovated property of significance, is there recourse as well if there's, and not just to say Brad's cousin, but just anyone in general, if they move into a property and they think it's all okay, but then you have some issues with the water that we've just been seeing recently. The drainage is not right.
Yep, generally not. Unless you've done the inspections, pointed it out and sorted that out before you've purchased.
Yep.
In a bigger complex, obviously you talk to the body corporate and you can get things sorted. but in a smaller complex, still body corporate. So there might be some recourse, but you're always better to do your own checks.
Yep. Good to know.
And then building pests is the other one, right?
Yeah, correct.
Awesome.
And even a little thing like termites, they can do a lot of damage that you cannot see.
No.
and often
until it's too late.
Correct. And often the fix isn't that expensive, and a treatment isn't that expensive.
Better off with prevention as opposed to the cure. Get in there, get someone to do a barrier protection for termites, and costs you probably, my guess is maybe less than $1,000 to do it, depending on the significance of it. Maybe termite barrier protection.
Yeah, I think it's $600 or something.
Yeah.
First home buyers grant, is that now for the listeners out there in Victoria at least? Because I know that every state's got a bit of a nuance, but in Victoria, is it only for new builds or places that haven't been lived in? Is that correct for the grant side of things?
It hasn't changed. I think it's up to $650, Joel.
Yeah, there's a stamp duty concession for first home buyers, and it actually is, I believe it's a cutout threshold, so it might even go a little bit higher than $650, but it cuts out as you get closer to a certain mark.
Yeah,
but I haven't.
And that $10,000 is only for new builds, though, isn't it? The actual grant.
Correct.
For new builds, yeah.
Do they have to be regional? It can be anywhere. There we go. We're throwing a few curveballs now.
Don't know that one.
That's all right. We'll get back to the listeners on that one.
We'll get back to listen to that one.
10K,
they're my
possibly metro, possibly regional.
they're my questions. So thank you very much.
Good Q&A. Before we start wrapping up, Wayne, and as we start to wrap up, anything else that we should have asked that we didn't ask today?
Good question.
No, I think we've covered it. I think we talked about markets, we talked about cash flow, capital growth, the importance of both. I think we've covered pretty much everything. And most importantly, mate, where can the listeners get you at? Yes, so yourpropertyadvocates.com.au, website, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Your Property Advocates, and my mobile number 0408 316 777. And you're a very approachable guy. So yeah, if you're a first-time buyer or an investor, and you feel like you want to have a catch up with Wayne just to discuss options, very approachable and very professional. So I'd highly recommend. And look, I'll say to the tankers that one of my big investor rules that I've learned over my years of losing money and gaining insights and the rest of it is spending a little bit of money to actually make money is well worth it when you're actually making these sort of kind of investment decisions in your life, whether it's seeing a financial planner when you're coming up with a whole bunch of, your financial plan and the rest of it, whether it's seeing a property advocate when you're purchasing your first property and you don't actually know, even if it's not your first property, where generally speaking, you've got specialists in a specific field. And I can, say it's general advice and all that kind of stuff because I'm not a financial planner, I'm not a property advocate or anything. But as an everyday Aussie, paying a little bit of money to do it right will actually end up making you generally making you money and saving you money. So that's my bit of advice. It took me about 20 years to realize some of this stuff. So I used to think that it was just money spent, that I could just do it myself, I could research it myself, I counted myself quite competent and the rest of it. And then you realize, no, when people do something as a job, they generally know the ins and outs and can save you some money, and that's why they're charging money. Yeah, spot on, Brad. And I think it's really important to get a good buyer's agent who is looking out for you and not just lining their own pockets, because there's a big difference between a property spruiker and a buyer's agent. Joel and I have had these discussions before. Good point to finish on. Absolutely. Keep in mind, yes, the people aren't always out to be acting in your best interest. So go with skepticism to make sure you're asking the right questions. And if you're not sure, reach out to someone like Wayne, myself, happy to pass on proper people, professionals to help. And general in nature is always these discussions, Brad. Great point. General in nature, knowledge only. Seek personal advice for your own situation, of course. We've got the disclaimer up front, but we're going to say it for those on the audio cast, Joel. Absolutely. And yes, it is a big investment with your financial life, whether it's
a property advocate or an advisor or whatever, you've got a big potential chance ahead of you and a large asset when you're talking about a property. So to make an outlay to get the right foot in the door, and so to speak, and get yourself the right path ahead. Absolutely, I think it's a small cost to make sure that you're getting a huge asset on the right leg up. But anyway, without further ado, this part of the podcast, Wayne, is where we do What's Your Choice, or 50-50, where it's all about, you've got many choices in investments and areas, and as you said before, regions and suburbs, but you've also got choices in life. So Wayne actually mentioned he's got one today, which is investment related, which is almost we do that every now and then. So you get a pass today, Wayne.
We did touch on it though. It was about the old adage about cash flow versus capital growth. So we've already touched on it.
We spoiled it. Okay, no worries.
All right, I've got a backup one, Jolie, only because of our chat about Apple and India. If you want me to throw it in,
Sure, go for it.
Apple, Android.
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, I'm an Apple guy and have been all my life. Apple got me as a customer, I think, in my early 20s, and I've never looked back, and it's just convenient now. Everything's there, but funnily enough, all my other stuff's pretty much Android, like my laptop. I don't have an Apple laptop, and yeah, so maybe Samsung or Android might get me in the future. Who knows?
There you go, Wayne.
Very similar to Joel. Apple got me a long time ago as well. Although I cannot drive a Mac, so on the laptop.
So just to the phone side of things. Then.
Yeah, phone.
There we
iPad.
go.
Yep.
Bradley.
So yeah, Apple grabbed me. I was in a house when Lee, my housemate, back in my early 20s, came back from either Iraq or Afghanistan. He had the first Apple that came out phone, and I was like, that's great. And so I had the Apple 3, and then I've Android ever since. I think Android is moving faster than Apple, but hey, Apple's a solid product and all the rest of it. But no, I'm Android. There we go. Investment choice.
Could see you being an Android guy.
Yeah.
See you being an Android guy.
I don't know what that means there, Joel, but what you're insinuating. But
you're a very tech savvy person. I feel like the Android users have a higher level. They feel like they're above the general Apple user, I reckon.
Damn it, called out and accurate in the statement there, Joel. But we'll leave that there.
No,
Apple make good products. I'd say that to people. Apple make good quality products.
Yeah, easy to use. Absolutely.
Easy to use.
Good customer service.
And
good customer service.
My wife is just there doing this.
Yeah.
So she's a big Apple fan.
Yeah,
there you go, 50-50. Thank you, Wayne, for your time today, mate.
Absolutely. And where can the listeners get us at, Brad?
They can get us at
Arnie?
Money at the Tank on all platforms, whether that is YouTube, Instagram, Spotify. Search for Money in the Tank, you will find us. And if you are not subscribed, go to our YouTube channel, please. Hit that subscribe or follow us on Instagram for more updates.
Yep, we love hearing from you.
If you've got more information like property advocates, any other topics, etc., that you want to raise, just we can get anybody in.
Absolutely.
Big Jolly's got contacts everywhere.
We'll throw out the big arm length, and we'll just bring in all the sphere of different people that people want to hear about, listeners want to hear about. So we love hearing from you. We love hearing your questions. We love hearing your 50-50s too. So, trivial things just that are irritating you, that you're having a domestic fight about in the house that you want to know the answer to. As we've spoken about before, feel free to throw it in there. We love it.
Love it. All right, Tankers.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tankers. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks, guys.